Spent 9 years in Royal Australian Infantry and then transferred to Army Aviation in the 1980s and became one of the first observers for the Corps. I served in 161 and 162 Recce Squadrons, 171 General Support and then 171 with when the Hueys were transferred there from Air Force. He then spent a period of time in the school environment, the School of Army Aviation, 80th Hero School, and now at the Army Helicopter School. He spent the last 15 years in instructor training wing, teaching other people how to do their job well. And that's him as an aviator. He's here as a historian. Chris has gone and made a major contribution to the Museum of Army Flying up at Oakey, in conjunction with one of his colleagues, Tony Egan, in their research they did on the World War I artefacts up there. And through that research and his contributions to the Corps history being prepared by Colonel Ross Harding, Chris has built up a wealth of knowledge on what happened in those early years with aviation. And on that basis, Chris, I invite you to address the Society.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, thanks, sir. Thanks for the nice introduction. As you can tell by my fancy dress, I am still serving. Age-wise, I have to do it as an active reservist. I'm quite busy with it. I'm very much a full-time flying instructor. Pity missed out. I did a pilot's course. It's not so I got sick of reading maps. I got never into an editing. And a part-time historian. I'd love to be a full-time historian, but finding the time for it. Also, I don't know how one has a living being a full-time historian, really. Accordingly, it is just a little hobby of mine. It's a hobby out of general interest. It's the only thing I can do half decently out of school. History-wise, across the board, modern history, then specialising in military, aviation, predominantly army, but across the board, so aviation, I'm interested in all aspects of RAAF history and World War II and post-World War II and what have you. Army aviation, specifically World War I and the periphery of World War I, which is the theme of what I'm going to talk to you about today, and also the reformation of army aviation right up until the current time, effectively. History is still being made as we speak. Just on that, if you thought you were coming here for a history lecture, that's probably why half the members aren't here, I might add, but it can often be a fairly boring subject, and the way it's taught at school, which is just times and dates, 1642, whatever it was, Columbus and on the ocean blue. Those things really don't mean anything. History only means something when it applies to where you are now, or what you're doing, or what you have done. So accordingly, history, it's often quoted that people that fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat the mistakes. And that's the practical application of actually being knowledgeable, even within little clique organisations like ours, of being knowledgeable about what we've done and where we've got to and how we've got there, the mistakes we've made. A lot of people talk the talk on it but never walk the walk. Like Army, for example, and this is the first thing, that's not all that controversial. We say that we have all these lessons learned, and I think we've even got a centre down in Canberra to maybe a lesson learned. As an example though, and not knocking the ADF, we tend to often make the same kind of mistakes. Even the older chaps here, we've been involved in counter-insurgency warfare since the Korean War, so probably 60 odd years. You would think when the last proper conventional war we fought was the Korean War, where we had definitive front lines and we still claim for that kind of stuff. But all the wars we've been engaged in, there's been some limited conventional aspects of it. Vietnam, Malaya, before that, Borneo, even the more recent deployments, East Timor, Solomon Islands, Afghanistan especially, really are counter-insurgency operations. I won't be too controversial, but you can argue that the lack of lessons learned probably resulted in some negative outcomes, in as much as we endured more casualties than what we should have if we'd have applied all the lessons we learned, even going back to the Vietnam. The Taliban are radically different from the Vietnam. People say that they're more technologically advanced. Sure, they have some more advanced weapons, some oil, but they use mobile phones and garage door radios to let off IEDs with a Viet Cong used tripwires. It's effectively the same kind of operation. So basically along those lines, the history, I gather that the members of the Aeronautical Society, actually before I pitch this any further, hands up those of you who were pilots. Any stage? No? Hands up. Private? Private. And hands up those who are engineers. Right, so I'm speaking to a predominantly engineering based. And likewise, when we get into it, I shall try and pitch it. I think enough said of the history. The issue we're talking about is Saturday week, the theme. There's the 100th anniversary of the first military flight in Australia by Lieutenant Eric Harrison in Foxkite CFS 3 down at Point Cook. The Army actually owns that history. I'm not going to get into Intersectional Rivalry here with my RAAF colleagues. However, across the board, we're not really that big on it. World War I is really a little, strangely, it's something that not a lot of people in the current day have much interest in, and the early days of flight training. It used to peeve me walking into the officers' mess up here with one squadron when you see the regimental colour, and it used to have Palestine, Western Front, Battle of Hamel, and things like this, and I thought, one squadron RAAF formed in 1925. There's a very tenuous link there between one squadron RAAF and one squadron Australian Flying Corps. Again, from an Army perspective, we owe the history because our operational squadrons during World War I, the Great War, they weren't a separate service. They were, you call themselves the Australian Flying Corps. They were initially, our operational squadrons were squadrons of the Royal Flying Corps with a little ostrich after it. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically they were units of the AIF, the Australian Imperial Force. There was some aviation occurring in the Navy during World War I, but again, the aviators were supplied by the Royal Flying Corps. Having said that, after cessation of World War I, the aviation corps as such wasn't disbanded in the Army. 1st of April 1921, they promulgated the Royal Australian Air Force by an Act of Parliament. It was backdated to the 31st of March for obvious reasons. Nobody wanted to be part of an organisation that was started on the 1st of April. And as I touched on, the first two flying squadrons, number 1 squadron and number 3 squadron, and they were formed both at Point Cook in July 1925. So it took that long to get everything into place before we had those two operational squadrons. 3 squadron was an Army cooperation squadron, tactical bombing with DH-9s. 1 squadron was a fighter squadron with SE-5s. And those aircraft were given to us by the British after World War I. Between World War I and starting flying operations, again initially at Point Cook, the aircraft were maintained by the Army, and they actually did a couple of flying courses and produced some new pilots during that period. Right, before I run out of breath, I suppose we better get back to the date. 1st of March 1914, fairly significant. You guys have probably had a quick read of that little handout I've given you. I've highlighted a couple of points on it. It's pretty dull reading. And even though nobody here is pilots as such, I imagine that there's aviation enthusiasts. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with that article? just off the top of your head?
About experienced pilots, 100 hours.
I just highlighted that because one of the others, several things that are throwaway line. Yeah. But I'll cut straight to the chase. The article is all rubbish. It's made up. I first read that article in a historical publication in 1981, I think it was. And when I read it, I thought, this is all incorrect. None of those aircraft types in it are mentioned. It's supposed to be an accident report from 1947. All those aircraft types here, with the exception of the Capital, 1915. They all retired by the end of 1915. The throwaway comment on the cost of accidents. I doubt very much if 29 accidents would have cost £315, even in the money in those days, considering all the aircraft were written off. They were actually quite expensive pieces of machinery. And a little throwaway comment there that the throwaway comment there that the cost of those accidents would have provided spurs and gauges to the whole of the flying service. For starters, the flying service never wore spurs and gaiters. I can assure you. The British Army only adopted cavalry traditions in about the late 1960s. Yeah, so basically, it's made up as a good laugh. Now, however, that wasn't presented. That appeared in the Combat Aviation newsletter. That's where a desktop published it from in September last year, which is sponsored by DGF. It wasn't under humour and trivia. It was put up as a serious subject. Whereas a knowledgeable person would look at it and think, you know, the idea of it is to look where we are now with all our flash aircraft and our $60 million MRHs and $51 million Tigers and all the high technology and how good we are and how effective we are. And back in those days, all the general staff and the hierarchy of the Defence Force weren't forward thinking, never saw the capabilities of aviation. They were effective in warfare and basically were. And that's the attitude we have of like World War I generals, isn't it? The fact they're stodgy, they've got no imagination. But some of the points I'm going to talk to you about will, I think, demonstrate that that's quite patently untrue. Right. First military flight. I'll get to turn over to got a couple of photographs, unfortunately black and white, on the second page. The top photograph there is a picture of, which I need my glasses, I think. Eric Harrison, I think, is flying the box boat. And he has a brigadier general sitting behind him who was the area commander for Victoria. But basically, that's the aircraft, and most people know what a box fight looks like. Send the replica down at Point Cook. We've got another replica up at Oakley at the Army Aviation Museum. It's a very rudimentary aircraft, even for the time. It'd be easy to do an instrument rating on it because it doesn't have any instruments. The only thing that's visible to the naked eye in a box kite is a drip valve in a glass tube that shows whether the engine is being lubricated. And that sensor element is important. Actually glided quite well. Having said that, they didn't glide quite well at all. They're a drag boat. One of the things that's in that article saying we've got a broad range of airspeeds. The box kite actually had a range of about 6 or 7 knots between the stalling speed and the V&A. But it didn't really matter because you couldn't have an airspeed that had anything. But basically, the first flight did occur on the 1st of March 1914 during the process of organising the Central Flying School. One point I'll make, though, I mentioned it at the start. The Central Flying School has operated in Australia continuously. There's an ABC a couple of weeks ago talked about CFS at Point Cook. Point Cook being the longest continuously operating military airfield in the world. And some people actually challenge that, but it's actually true at Point Cook. You've got a limited operational capability at the moment. It's pretty well a museum flight. But as a RAAF prior to that Army airfield, it has operated continuously since 1913, or the first flight in 1940. Likewise, the two organisations, Central Flying School and Australian Army Aviation Board, are still in existence to this date. And that's where I'll step back a bit. On the 20th September 1912, Army Order number 570 of 12, that has a lot of imagination to it, established the Australian Army Aviation Board, and that's what it was called, and also the Central Flying School. There was a further Army Order a month later, about 3 weeks later, that actually laid out the structure of the flying school, how many instructors it have, how many officers, 32 air mechanics, 7 clerks and drivers, and laid out the whole organisation of it. So if you just put that date in mind, 20th September 1912, leading up to the 1st of March 1914, I'll do the maths for you, it's 18 months. So to promulgate by an Act of Parliament the formation of an aviation corps and a flying school in 1912 actually takes some foresight. Senator G.F. Pearce was the Minister for Defence under that government, which was just before Billy Hughes was elected in 1914. I think that was an ALP government, the quite an effective one, won the war. But Senator Pearce was lobbied by what was called the Australian Aerial League in 1909 onwards. During the course of 1910, 1911, there was some demonstration of experimental flights in Australia, but not that much, more out of public interest. 1911, they demonstrated a box flight to the north. That was from the Bristol Aircraft Company who came out. Harry Walker brought a soft lift tabloid out. There's another number of other demonstration flights, including Harry Houdini and Nancy Police, a few others. But basically, very little aviation activity. Senator Pearce went to the Imperial Conference at the end of 1911, and he was quite impressed. He went out to an exercise on the Salisbury Plain, where they hadn't even formed the Royal Flying Corps yet. The Royal Flying Corps had put on a demonstration of how it could effectively drop bombs and that kind of stuff. So he became quite enamored of it. And when I said the Royal Flying Corps hadn't been formed, those British aircraft were operated by the Royal Engineers. They formed the Royal Flying Corps in May of 1912. So realistically, our aviation corps was formed only 4 months after the Royal Flying Corps. And we were the second specific flying corps formed. Obviously the Germans had a fairly advanced aviation corps in their army, but really there isn't much history on how it was formed or how it divulged. It divulged into the Luftwaffe, which is an air force, following it off Hitler coming about. Prior to that, German aviation was armed. And they still have an army component in the States, broken similar to themselves. But, gentlemen, I digress. Before I press on, if any of you have any questions, I'm going to say this at the start. I'd like them straight away, because I really like digressing on things. So, yeah, no need to put your hand up. Like a skill kid, but if you want to, you can put your hand up and ask me a question, I'll answer it straight away. Other than that, questions at the end, if you want it. And for other matters involving aviation history, I'll be available during the rest of the activity before I shoot back up the tour. Horrible dogs. Yes, mate. Yes. At Kempton Flying School, we had Aviator Certificate number 132, and he was employed, I think, by the Bristol Aircraft Company. Strangely, despite promulgating the Corps and the Flying School, the Australian government advertised for 2 competent aviators in January 1912. So basically 9 months before the promulgation of the Corps. And Henry Petra was appointed in July. Another chap called Harry Musty, who was an Australian, was appointed as well. He then declined the offer, and then they picked up Eric Harrison. And initially they were the first 2 instructors. Petra got appointed to the half flight, then he ended up in number 1 squadron, which trained flight for in Palestine. Harrison remained at Point Cook throughout the war. He was basically the CEO of the Central Flight School. In those days, the Royal Aero Club was a worldwide organisation for issuing aviator certificates. And it was terrific in those days as well, because once you were issued an aviator certificate, you were deemed competent to fly anything. They didn't have qualified flying instructors. That only happened towards the end of World War I, and that was introduced to address a very high fatality rate. But basically, if you held an aviator certificate, you could fly any aeroplane that there was. Good idea. I wish CASA would take that on board.
Well, my pilot's license says I can fly any land, but then the rating is
Yes.
on another page.
That's right, yeah. No, you're rated by aircraft type and by group, yeah. But, now, to cut a long story short, now, Harrison and Petra were both born in Australia. When they first advertised in January 2012, a lot of the naysayers said there might be, because they advertised as £400 a year. And they said, a lot of people said the money's too low and nobody's going to apply for it. And you didn't have to be in Australia to apply for it. An aeroplane competition they had 2 years before had to be an Australian-built aeroplane. Made out of Australian parts, had all these flying specifications, 20 miles an hour and all this sort of stuff. As it was, there were no Australian-made aeroplanes in those days. There weren't any responses to that. Even though one chap probably could have given it a go. But as it was, there was over 50 applicants. Harry Musty declined the offer because I think he picked up a job with Sopwith, and Eric Harrison got picked up as the second aviator. And because the first course they ran in Point Cook only had 4 trainees on it, they considered the 2 instructors was probably the same as what we do now. 2 trainees per instructor. That's the way we operate now, accordingly. So, again, just to close off on that aspect, even from the formation of the Aerial League, the Longer government in 1909, the promulgation of the Australian Army Aviation Corps and the Central Flying School, the organisation of that, and then up to the first military flight, just an 18-month period. Strangely, Harrison and Petra were appointed in July and August, so before the promulgation of the Corps. And the aeroplanes were bought in July initially. 2 BE-2As, which is the aeroplane on the bottom. It looks a lot more conventional than the box kite. Tandem seat, front engine, stationary, 4-blade propeller, tractor. That is, the propellers at the front rather than behind the pilots. Despite our little tradition at Oakley of parading the first Army aircraft, the BE-2As were actually our first Army aircraft. And they would have been the first aircraft to fly in Australia. They were stored in Victoria Barracks, Melbourne in 1913. They sat there for a year and a bit, brought out in 1914. Got all the fabric and got it in storage. They rotted on the sea voyage as well as in storage. And because there was no aircraft in Australia, which you have to appreciate at that time, nobody knew how to dope fabric. So basically they had to bring some chaps out from England to be able to refabric the aircraft so they could fly. There were 2 of those, 2 Deeper Dussin monoplanes, which had a little 35 horsepower Anzani 3-cylinder engine. Just on the Deeper Dussins, there's some material that's published, like our core history is still in draft, They said one was just always designed for taxiing training, and the other one was considered fairly useless for training. Now, in actual fact, both of the reducers were useless for training. On the morning of the 1st of March 1914, Eric Harrison did the first military flight, and on the afternoon of the 1st of March 1914, Lieutenant Petra did the second military flight and the first military crash. He crashed one of the Deepadusses, so that was our first military accident on the same day that we had our first military flight. That particular aircraft never flew again. They never actually bothered putting the wings on it. They used to use it for taxiing training because it had a skid landing gear and differential braking. It's like some modern aeroplanes have for taxiing, and used to use exercises and just, and the other one, all they can do is get the tail wheel on the ground and put it back on the ground, which is good practice for takeoffs. The other Deepadus, there's no evidence that it ever got airborne. Even though I've seen a photograph of it about 6 inches off the ground. But that was as close as it could get. Yeah, so basically, and not knocking our core historians, the people who made the BU-2A never gave us a nice little silver trophy, but the people who made the pistol box both did. And so that's why we have it as a core tradition, when the senior Sutherland brings in our first Army aircraft. And you gather by my youthful good looks that I'm the senior Sutherland, being below the rank of major, I might add. Yeah, just a bit about the aircraft before I crack on. The top photograph is called the box guide. Most people have seen a box guide. I should have got a picture before. The control there on the right-hand side of the pilot as such, it can only really be flown by one person at a time. But the big stick up Lieutenant Harrison's right-hand side, it controls the elevators, which are up the front. It didn't have ailerons. It used wing warping. So if you pull the stick sideways, it'd bend the upper main planes, and that'd produce a bank. But it had two very effective rudders at the rear, and the rudder bar. The issue was, you see the general sitting behind the pilot. Initially, the instructor would sit in the front seat because he was the only one who could put his feet on the rudder bars. And the student would sit in the rear seat and then sort of following through on the stick. And we talked about how the rudder worked. And then after a couple of hours, they'd swap seats. But if there became any like balance issues, we put a bit of rudder in. The instructor actually couldn't do that much about it because his feet actually couldn't hit the rudder bar. Whereas your BE-2A, the aircraft below, had full dual controls, which is a more modern format. The Bristol had a 50 horsepower Gnome engine, 5-cylinder rotary. You young chaps wouldn't know how a rotary engine worked unless it was in a Mazda RX-7. It's the same as, it's similar to a radial, like you do. Yes, that's right. Yeah. A radial engine has got your crankcase in the middle and your cylinders all around the outside. And on a radial engine, like in the aircraft you'll have a look at over there, or the Caribou even that's out the front, the crankcase is actually bolted to the airframe, and the crankshaft is actually bolted to the propeller, and be it a constant speed unit or what have you, but that's how it works. With a rotary engine, the crankcase is bolted to the propeller, and the back of the crankshaft is actually bolted to the airframe. So the engine cylinders go around at the same speed as the propeller. In an aircraft like the box guide, that's not really such a big issue because it was a tractor engine, not a tractor engine, a pusher. So it was behind the pilot, and it didn't have that big a torque effect. Even though I'm told a box guide would turn in half the radius to the right than it would to the left. Simply because that's the way the engine was rotated. Other aircraft, actually they use rotary engines throughout the war, but in the tractor format, like a Sopwith 1.5 strutter, Sopwith trainer, Sopwith camel, those kind of aircraft. You're getting up in the horsepower, 130 horsepower, fairly, that's in a camel. Now the issue with a camel as you don't only have the torque effect of the whole engine turning around, but you've got a gyroscopic effect. And for those who don't understand gyros, the effect happens 90 degrees after input, or the control input. And I did a 2-year exchange with the British Army back in the early 80s. Luckily, my troop commander actually owned the Sopwith 1 RAAF struggle with this struggle reflection. And he took me for a flight in. And to cut a long story short, if I can remember it, forward stick was right bank, aft stick was left bank, right stick was pitch up, and left stick was pitch down. That's right. And nobody thought, engineering-wise, of actually just reading the controls 90 degrees out of focus, as they do with a helicopter. For those that have some helicopter experience, helicopters have a thing called phase lag, and if it wasn't taken out of the control rigging or the way the pitch change was actually attached, if you put in forward stick it would roll to the right, it'd be the same thing. So 90 degrees after the effect. But basically, the Camel, for example, had 2 issues that killed all its pilots. A, that the controls didn't work in an intuitive sense. B, with the engine spinning around, if you just lifted the main wheels off, it'd spin itself into the ground. And also, they never had any 2-seater versions, so you just read the pilot landing notes, and I'm sure there'd been a pretty big warning there saying, retard the engine as you lift off. And that would have saved a few people's lives. Just on that, most rotary engines, Sopwith Camel 1, the Bristol box guide was the same, didn't have a throttle. Once it started, it went flat chat. The only way you could control your engine speed was the kill switch, which is on your primary control stick, and basically that would ground the magneto. Magneto in the case of the Bristol box guide, magnetos mean dual ignition in the case of something like that, a Sopwith Camel. Yeah, and if you go over England and see those aircraft fly or something that isn't a replica, most replicas are just built with a radial engine. It looks proper, but it doesn't fly the same. But you hear this burr, 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 like as they're coming into landing. Now, you don't want to be too big a gap between your burps, too, because if the engine stops, it stops. And unlike a normal aeroplane, the airflow isn't going to send the propeller off and actually start it up again. So it was quite a bit of a skill for engine management to actually get the aircraft back on the ground. Once you're airborne, you didn't worry about it. You let it run at full throttle. The same as you do if you're in air complex. Put the throttle forward, fight the dreaded up until you run out of fuel. Right. I think that's enough on the engineering characteristics of the box guide. Yes, mate.
Sorry.
Yes.
Talk about the ground engine.
Yes.
And the pistons going around.
Yes.
With the top. All I can remember, there was a big problem with cast oil, lubricated oil.
That's right. Yeah.
This in turn had an effect on the pilot, and usually ended up going towards the
Yes.
rig.
Yes.
Is that correct?
No, it is correct. In actual fact, it was a good out. When I first got interested in more the airmen of World War I, and you read all their exploits, you think, God, these guys will do it. And one of my older mentors said, yeah, Chris, you've got to take into account that they were pissed all the time. You know, like flying at 27,000 feet without oxygen, all that kind of stuff. You're right, a Sopwith Camel or a Bristol box guide, the oil tank was as big as a fuel tank. And basically the oil was just injected into the engine and then it got thrown out by centrifugal force. And as all you engineers know, if something goes in, then it has to come out. And it used to come out the top of the valve ends. If the engine was in front of you like a Sopwith Camel, the pilots used to breathe with the babies all the time. And constantly breathing in castor oil had to be dried. Now that was acknowledged by the Royal Flying Corps, so they provided each squadron with the only known cure for the run, which was large rations of port and what that is. Port and sherry, I think it was. So they had port and sherry by the guards. And accordingly, they fought quite a civilised war. So you go and fight the hunt all day and then piss it up all night. And sort of sober up in the morning for your dawn patrol. But that would control your bodily functions in that regard. Yeah. But no, the Camel's oil tank was as big as the fuel tank as well. Yeah.
It has a function of keeping the aircraft weight too, so you carry more emissions or fuel.
That'd be a very valid
So
point.
it's not all bad.
And to get a daily scouring is good for the digestion tract. Yes, we know big fat bastards like myself, but we're be flying in those days.
Chris, in the interest of digression,
Yes.
We still use Rotax engines.
Oh, we do too, that's right.
The Shadow 200 uses a 38 horsepower Wankel Rotax engine as a pusher.
Fair enough. No, actually that wouldn't
Still in
surprise me.
service. Yeah.
Because microlights and what have you, yes, the Rotax kind of engines are now quite, are all the go. Right. The BE-2A, as I said, which should have been our first Army aeroplane, so the first ones to arrive. They arrived in early 1913. It was a much more conventional aircraft. And as it says down there, or which is picture one flying on the next page. There's your proof. No, there's an instructor in the back. He seems to have lost his trainee in the front. That's coming over the fence at Point Cook. And for those that have been down there, there's obviously my fond recollections at Point Cook. You didn't want to land short of the ship farm at Werribee, which I think was put in afterwards. Point Cook's actually at Werribee, but that's all Werribee was famous for. It's a series works for Melbourne. Yes, and it says in the little spiel down there that it was only used for advanced training. They actually used the BE-2A up to about 1916 for advanced training, but come the end of 15, 16, we got more advanced training types through the Central Flight School. Things like RAAF 504s, Curtis Jennings that we got from the US. There's a bunch of types that they actually used for training. The box kind was pretty well washed up by 1916. SE 5As, only operational and training in, we had a training squadron for them in Leicester, in Pico, and number 2 squadron was training flying for them. There's a fighter squadron for SE 5As. I was going to talk about a little bit towards the end. First flight, 1st of March. The first course started, they started their ground training in July, started their flying training in August 1914. So soon after they started their fire training was the outbreak of war, which was the 1st of August 1914. There was 4 trainees. It had to be 1 permanent forces officer, and that was Lieutenant Richard Kingsley, Richard Williams was the first chief of the air staff when they formed the RAAF. The others were T.W. White, who was a captain, Lieutenant Manuel, and Lieutenant George Mertz. Williams was the permanent forces officer, and the other 3 were CMF. So Mertz, for instance, was Melbourne University Rifles. White was born in Queensland Mounted Infantry. White was the captain, the other 3 were lieutenants. They all passed their course, and they graduated in November of 1914. Richard Williams was the first one to graduate. He was obviously the most gifted, or whether there might have been some discrimination then between the permanent army and the reserve. Not that I'd ever imagine that. And the remainder got their Aero Club certificates a couple of weeks after. Across the course of the war, Central Flying School ran 8 courses of flying training during World War I. So after the first course, another 7. Basically 2 courses a year. And the courses actually got quite large. I think the last course they ran was for 28. And by then, they'd gone to both officer and NCO aircrew. So there was, on the last course, there was 12 officers, if my maths are correct, 16 sergeants. And about 70% of them passed. But you can only do your basic flying training in Australia, and then you do your type transition or your operational conversion over in the UK at that stage. even if you're going to one squadron, the Bristol fighters in Palestine, you'd still do your training in the UK and then go to beautiful Palestine to go and fight the Turks. The German army air corps that was supporting the Turks. One squadron were again a very successful unit. So, advances in flying training. Some of the good things about it: 8 courses, no fatalities. First fatality at Point Cook was in 1921 on a course of the Australian Instructional and Administrative Staff, which were an army unit as well. We're doing it with the gift aircraft after World War I. So that's a bit of a feat in itself, especially with aircraft that were that basic or developmental. All the aircraft in World War I were developmental. Necessity is the mother of invention. The greatest advances in aviation were definitely World War I. Again, World War II. If you look at the aircraft that started flying in World War II compared to those that flew at the end, huge advances in technology over a 5-year period. The RAF started in 1939 with Hawker Demons and things like that. Hawker Hurricane, mostly fabric over a metal airframe. Only the front end was all metal. Spitfire was all metal. It was about the first monocoque construction all metal aircraft. The developments even within those aircraft types during World War II was quite phenomenal. Development sets, Cold War, rapid developments in aviation. Space program helped. I think that the aircraft that were developed in the Cold War, so going from for example, a Sabre to something like an F-15 over a 15-year period is actually quite dramatic development as well. Seems to have taken off a bit at the moment. You know, this F-35 we're flying is supposed to be a wonderful bit of kit. It's all fly-by-wire, carbon fibre. So whether they're advances in themselves, the latest advances I've noticed in aviation are advances in avionics, things of that nature. We're still flying the Power after 46 years of having said that, first car was put in Vietnam, 1968. They were re-engineered. I'll wait for the sound of freedom. What we were doing, where we could determine what they were doing. Right. Next page over, fellas, just on an engineering bent. There's a couple of the more modern aircraft. You've got a couple of Camels down the bottom. You asked about the SE-5A. Doesn't mention here, but that SE-5A there's from the training squadron at Leiden. It's a Wolseley Viper engine SE-5A producing 200 horsepower. Now, the ones we flew operationally with 2 squadrons, Australian Flying Corps, for example, had an all-alloy V10, 220 horsepower, double supercharged with an intercooler engine, and could operate to 25,000 feet. think about all alloy V8 supercharged engines, you're thinking something that's much more modern times, wouldn't you? Rather than back in 1970, when that was developed. So the aircraft towards the end of the war were actually quite advanced. Bristol Fighter was quite an advanced aircraft. Sting at both ends, 2 Lewis guns in the back, Vickers in the front. Had a Rolls-Royce engine, 270 horsepower. They were quite effective machines. And again, I think over some of the points that I've made, all I wanted to do initially was disprove that notion that back in those days, that the military hierarchy weren't forward-thinking and whatever. They achieved some quite fantastic things over that period. And likewise, it set the foundation for what the Australian Army have gone on to achieve now, and the Royal Australian Air Force have gone on to achieve. Just a few stats from aircrew, about aircrew in World War I. Basically, we deployed the Mesopotamian half flight, which became 30 Squadron RAC, predominantly Australians, but that was an unsuccessful campaign in Iraq. Mesopotamia was called Iraq in those days. No, Iraq was called Mesopotamia. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. That deployment was Indian Army. The aircraft was supplied by them under the British, and mostly Australians that flew. It was an unsuccessful campaign over in 1916. Overall in the war, 423 Australians flew as aircrew, 355 with the Australian Flying Corps, 54 with the Royal Flying Corps and Royal Naval Air Service, 11 flew with both. That doesn't include W.A. Watt, Oswald Watt. He flew with the French Foreign Legion, but he ended up with as a flight commander in one squadron in Palestine. Of those, there were 321 pilots, 91 observers, 8 of them became observers and then pilots. And that included the likes of Ross Smith and Bert Hinkler, who started their flying careers as observers and then did their pilot careers. Manfred von Richthofen started as an observer as well. Of those aircrew, 144 were killed in action, which is a pretty high proportion. We had 65 flying aces, so 5 victories or more. We had 65 aces, destroyed 799 enemy aircraft amongst them. Awards, 1 Victoria Cross, Frank McNamara, number 1 squadron. 7 OBEs, 19 DSOs, 8 DSCs, 55 military crosses, 67 distinguished flying crosses, 19 Air Force crosses, 6 distinguished conduct medals, 5 military medals. So that's not a bad effort, is it, for a group that small. Having said that, AIF-wise, I think the standing size of the AIF towards the end of the war was just short of 200,000, which out of a population of 5 million was quite significant. 54,000 Australians died in World War I, 153,000 were seriously injured. And I'm talking there about amputations and things like that. Not coming home with shell shock or post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder in those days was just going hard enough. Very little assistance from the government after the war, hence the necessity for organisations like the RSL and Legacy and things like that. However, I think I've pretty well covered it. Any questions at the end? Mr. Good Carol's given me the wind up. I can talk like this for hours. No worries. Thanks, chaps.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Much appreciated. We've gone and gone from about 1912 all the way through up to the 60s and 70s, a little bit further and back to the 20s. The next address is actually going to be in the hangar over there. And Dave, do you need the time to get over there? To the workshop. Get to the workshop? Already ready? Okay. Okay. I had as a buffer to go and look through some of the exhibits, but I think we've just used the buffer. I'll be a little bit late going to do it over. So we won't do the other exhibits. We'll wait for keep on going on today's presentation so we don't miss out on that. But before we do, I'll read you a letter that was sent home from Mr. Chester, who was one of the first mechanics that worked on the aircraft in Australia. He was a contemporary of Harrison. It almost starts off with Dear Mum, but it's not quite. He He's writing this from the UK. I'm doing well. As far as my experience goes, that is marvellous. But the climate, hours for work and wages are absolutely rotten. You can tell this guy's a maintainer. I will not be sorry when I receive word from the Commonwealth officers in London saying that I've been successful in passing for a position which now partly awaits me in my native land. I found London a marvellous city, with one moving mass of people and traffic night and day. I was lost in the city several times, underground and above, but now know my way about fairly well. I had 2 weeks in this wonderful city with nothing to do, and looking round I wondered if wonders would ever cease. My second day in London was Derby Day, run at Epsom on June 3rd. It was a wonderful sight to see the motor cars, vans, rags and donkey carts of all descriptions. They were in thousands, and there was one moving mass of people almost as fast as the eye could see. Epsom is a very poor course for London to run, the largest race meeting of the year on. It's not a patch on Flemington. One can only see a very little of each race. The horses being at times out of sight. I saw the King's Horse beaten in the Derby, which was a great disappointment to the crowd. On the following Saturday, I went to the Aerial Derby, which was flown from Grantham White's Aerodrome at Hendon, which is just outside London. The race was around the outskirts of London over a course of 81 miles, and it was won by Somerville, one of England's best aviators. There were 8 starters in the big event, and 3 or 4 in some of the others. There were thousands to witness the racing, and although racing did not cease till 8:30 p.m, there was not a single mishap. It was very interesting to me and made me determined to go through with the school before returning. This I have been successful in doing. After seeing the sights of London, I secured a position for Mr. Holloway of the Minavera Motor Works as a tester of new cars before delivering them to purchasers of Batemans. After being there for a time, Mr. Holloway asked me if I would take a trip to Scotland. I had to go to Red Bull, not many miles from Loch overhauled two night Minavera cars belonging to Mr. C. Bailey. I went to Glasgow by express and then caught a steamer on the Clyde, which landed me at Rothesay, where I had to wait for another steamer to go through the Kyles and Boot to Loch Ridden. Then it's got Armadale, where a car was waiting for me. While on the Clyde, I saw a very large shipbuilding yard and docks, which stretched for several miles on each side of the river. I saw a new gunboat, Australian, for the Australian Navy, just launched out of the docks. Mr. Bailey proved to be a great sport. We used to go shooting in the heather and salmon fishing together. This is just the guy going up country to fix a car, so it's not a bad trip so far. We also toured a large part of Scotland. The sights were very beautiful. I was there 6 weeks when I received word from Mr. Bustede of the Bristol Aeroplane Works, Vinton, to come and start work there. I started there a few days later. There are fully 300 men at the works turning out biplanes, monoplanes, hydroplanes and tractors, etc. Almost every part of these machines are made by hand, and as there are new improvements and designs every month, they are not able to make parts to a standard yet. This naturally causes the necessity of the employment of so many hands as to get the machines out to time and to contract. I was at the works 5 weeks going through all classes of work, making parts for different machines and then assembling. I finished up in the Gnome engine test room. Mr. Bumstead, who is the company's head pilot, made arrangements for me to go to the school here on Salisbury Plains to get finally educated. I qualified as a fully equipped mechanic. Mr. Bumstead and Mr. E. Harrison, old Melbourne chums of mine, are now 2 of the leading aviators in England. They have put up some wonderful stunts in Germany and Spain. They came over here at the time of the coronation, and since then have been at this school, which is the largest of its sort in the world. They have made marvellous strides and have caused the English people to wonder. Mr. Harrison has been appointed the head instructor of the Australian Flying Corps and leaves shortly to take up that position. I may follow him to Australia a month or 2. Under 2 such able instructors, I have made better progress than I anticipated in such a short time, and also created a little surprise here. I have done some splendid flights with Mr. Bumstead on an 80 horsepower Gnome Bristol monoplane. These machines are very fast, going at a moderate rate that could be safe for flying. They will do from 100 to 120 miles an hour, and on a calm day, from 80 to 95. From a height of 3,000 feet, we did a splendid spiral, which got the word foreplane, coming down and around in a tremendous speed. It was quite exhilarating. When I got my first flights, the sensation was lovely. It was grand to be able to look down from a great height, flying over railways, roads and buildings. They look so small. I now look upon aviation as I did motoring in my motoring days and see little danger attached to it, providing you are very strict with your machine. If every aviator was a thoroughly qualified man, as he should be, and would see before starting that his machine was given the proper number of revolutions, and that all the wires were taut, the bolts and nuts tight, there would be very few accidents. The majority of aviators today neglect to do this, and are always anxious to get away while the weather is fine. This often causes disaster and makes aviation appear more dangerous than it really is. Only a few days ago, whilst Mr. England and myself were outside on a 50 horsepower Gnome Bristol monoplane, ran into a dense fog to make an almost unseen landing about 2 miles from the hangars. We had to leave the machine there and walk back and wait for the fog to lift. If this machine had not been tuned to a concert pitch, as we always keep them, we would have had a very slight smash at least. I'm now charge hand for all engines, and up to date I've given every satisfaction. I am kept busy and have to work a lot of overtime, so that my work will not get ahead of me. We have to always keep spare engines, and these have to be in first class order and ready to take the place of dirty engines or engines taken out for repairs. And unsurprisingly, Chester went on to be, if I've got it right, involved with the safety authorities at that time, and got involved in the first accident investigations in Australia, and that was his future career as a discipline. If you say that's 1912, when you think about some of the things that have gone on, we've heard about Patrick Lyons and what will happen to others in the future as they start their career. History definitely repeats us. There's lots of lessons to learn from very early characters. Went on for us, and we honestly don't often know very much about them.
On necessity though, sir, he was offered that position as chief mechanic at the CFS and went from private through corporal through sergeant to achieve his warrant, all in 1913.
Probably based on his technical ability rather than the ability to be able to do drill. Okay, we now follow Dave and we'll go and have a look at the pump.
You can all just stay sitting there for a minute. We will be able to take the opportunity to have a quick look over the other side. Just to let you know, I'm Warren David Crawley. I'm the officer in charge of restoration for the Heritage Centre. And just to show you some of our achievements, we put this into our display this year after 7.5 years of restoration. So we're very proud of this. The cockpit at the moment is not completed. That'll take another 2 years to complete it. We've identified all the resources, the bits and pieces, but it'll still take us 2 years to collect all that and outfit the cockpit. If we move now, quite quickly, because we've got to move down to our restoration hangar. Over in the other hangar, we just follow me. I want to show you the start of the restoration project, how we actually prepare ourselves for the onslaught of running into brick walls, because it's a matter of we're looking for bits and pieces. It's very hard, it's either very costly, it's overseas, we can't get repairs or bits and pieces, and we've got to change our mindset and go to manufacturing our own. So just to show you where we start, and it's to do with a Navro Anson, Second World War bomber, and I just want to show you what we start with, and I'll show you what we're going to finish with. So it's just quick, 5 minutes over here. And if you have a good look at it, you'll notice that about 80% of it, external surfaces, is cloth. A mono steel and also timber. You can't see all that, but I'll give you the opportunity to see it right now. So this comes from that's restoration. We actually put it on display to show people over the years, because a lot of people keep coming back to the Heritage Centre to visualise and see our progression. So we're going to leave this on our floor for about 2 years. Hopefully get around about 30,000 people seeing that over that period of time. And then we'll take it out and start to restore it bit by bit. This is all we've got. and 2 Avro engines, and on the Avro engines is also the main landing gear. We have no wings, we have no drawings. We had no drawings, but we have sourced them, and we're going to move into that. Now, how we're going to go about doing that is a lot of research, Google, our volunteers. When you go down and have a look around, some of them will still be there. They have still got information about how all these aircraft are put together. What we're losing as time goes by are the skill sets that we need to build or rebuild these aircraft. And what we want to do is stay with the design of the aircraft and default. No way. We want to stay on the straight and narrow with all the original bits, pieces and equipment. That will, most of our restoration is time, research and identifying the glues, the wood, the screws and the technology and how to do it. So I just thought I'd show you that. We'll go down, my car's around the side here. We've got a white Honda, so whether you like. This is the workshop for the Heritage Centre, and we basically have 3 aircraft at the moment that are going through restoration. At the moment we've got an Army Porter. Over there is our Vampire, which will be the main component or torque, and also over here is a wind yield. And so the wind yield and the Army were donated to us on a loan proviso that if they lose their display items, I'll come and collect these, but that'll be during a natural disaster or a fire or something like that. The Porter came to us by a decision by their curator that they've already got one, they don't need another one, get rid of it. So we said we'll put our hands up and take it on board. And the same with the wind yield. Now, you're going to ask, how can we just put our hands up and acquire an aircraft just because someone wants to get rid of it? The charter for Ambley Aviation Heritage Centre is to showcase the aviation history that Ambley has been part of from its conception in the early 40s to now. So that is any unit, any squadron, any civil organisation or defence force, navy and army. Now, I arrived here in 1970 and the Army Aviation flew out of here using the tarmac over here, and they had the last remnants of a few Sioux, Kiowa, Porters and a number of other aircraft. So anything the Army flew, we put our hand up and says we can put that in our museum. Anything the Navy flew, well no, they didn't fly anything out of here, they might have landed, but then we can take it a step further. We can go to the Singaporean Air Force. They come here, they used to do stints here because they've got a very short airspace. So they used to be, we used to play host to the Singaporean Airlines, Air Force. So we're looking at Hawker Hunters and the rest of it, and we have been offered a Hawker Hunter. Now, that's all well and good, but we have to get permission from our sponsor, who is the chief at the moment, and he has passed that on to, when the chief was deputy chief, he was our sponsor. The deputy chief now is our sponsor through the DCOORD and the Defence Air Force Heritage Directorate. So we've got to put all our requests up to them because they supply us with the funding and the expertise and a few other little bits and pieces. I mentioned the word expertise there. Where do we get it from? The gentlemen walking around here at the moment are our main source. Believe it or not, some of them and their fathers are still alive and they are all part of the Defence Force. So techniques and trade skills are being passed on. But unfortunately for us, those trade skills are a dying skill set. And we have to learn how to overcome that. We either go back and get these people out of retirement and they get, or go to their classes, because a lot of them are talking about and have set up minor classes on courses on how to dope aircraft. The captains talk about dope and glues, timbers and resins. I'll show you over there on the Vampire what it's actually talking about. Most people have seen them all, but environmental issues with aircraft, how they're stored, where they're flown, who's been looking after them, and also whether they're being subjected to Defence Force activities. For instance, an aircraft can sit out the tail of the runways there for 20, 30 years and never be touched. It can be drawn in and it can actually be surface finished about 20 times because they need something to practice on. Or the fireys come out and say, we need something to use as an exercise. So the Canberra 242 was exactly that. It ended up as an exercise article for fireys. So what we do with aircraft before they come into this hangar, we've got to check them that they're hazard-free. So it's not just roll in the aircraft, get our tools and hop into it. So we've got hazards. What are they? There's petrols, oils, lubricants, batteries, asbestos, chromate paints. We've got 20 years of hydrolysis working inside and around fuel tanks, humidity, and all the acids that can be generated. Not only that, we've got radiation. All the instrumentation that we have going back to the First World War, and in the Avro Anson, we had a spot check from Radiation Australia gods. They just come in and say, we can't stop them. They've got to get permission from the base. It's about the only warning you get. And they walk around with their, I'll call it a Geiger counter, it's most probably called something different now. But walking around the Avro Anson, higher reading than normal. And it ended up being a cracked glass on one of our instruments. It was letting out enough radiation for them to say, fix the glass or remove the instrument and bag and tag it and put it in an area where it can't do any further damage. Now, I would say to you that it's no more detrimental than the earlier fluorescent watches that you used to walk around with. But when we're told to do something, we've got to do it, we've got to adhere to it. So what defence directives are exactly the same as you would have down at the pointy end and or anywhere else in the work environment. So we comply, and if we don't, the hangar gets closed, the SADFO gets a smack on the wrist because his workshop's closed. We embarrass the Deputy Chief, so we are compliant. So I just thought I'd let you mention that one. Now, I was going to bring up a point that I will bring up a point that the captain made, and it's about what's history. Well, in our workshop, we can actually see it, feel it, and touch it, and play with it. But I keep saying to everyone that we are time travelers. We are moving every day forward in a moment of time. And that time is very relevant to us, because if we restore an aircraft, we've got to pick a moment in time. Because there are so many historians out there that will argue black and blue that it wasn't that colour, it didn't look like that, the shape wasn't like that, and you've used the wrong insignia. So to stop all that, we've got to pick the moment in time, build and restore the aircraft at that moment in time. Before we do that, we've got to get permission to pick that moment in time. And that is through the Defence Air Force Heritage Council. We put all our suggestions up, they look at them, they come back and say, that's it. But we also, when we restore an aircraft, We've got to restore it to its configuration as it was designed. If we don't, we then have to start our own engineering configurations. We take a wing off because we want to put an aircraft against a side of a hangar, and we only want one wing, one strut. We've got to start re-engineering, and we may have to do that. So we've got two destinations. The one, as per the aircraft, it's designed proper, or where we want to go for it to fit in our museum. Once we've decided that, that's our target. So we can then say for the RAeS, all we want to really do is just restore. So we'll go as per the plans. What do we then do to make sure that we're going to have an end target? Well, so far we've got 2.5 years of research. We've got to start with, I'll list them but not in priority, skill sets, resources, components, know-how. We've got to have the manpower, the tools, the equipment, the materials, and until we get at least 80% of that, we won't start, because we've got at least 7 to 8 years on the aircraft. If we start and stop, the momentum of achieving, it cancels out. The enthusiasm of the people that you're working with dies, and the skill sets and the training that we've provided for these people to go ahead and do the work is lost. So we've got to keep the momentum, and we use normal engineering management practices, project management, and just with ours, as opposed to the pointy end, we have a lot of slippage. It just keeps going longer and longer and longer. And unfortunately, most of the guys here will start the RAeS, but they won't be here to see it finished. However, we have an honour board. They will all be left there, and their name will stay with the Heritage Centre. So we don't just come in and restore aircraft for the fun of it. We have determination and direction, and that's what we're here for. The guys over there, and girls, we have some very clever females that come in and help us out, and they've actually got a little bit of ingenuity and know-how about materials, as in cloth and all the rest of it, and they are proving to be quite informative about some of the stuff that we wouldn't want to be using. However, anyway, enough of that. I'm just letting you know that we have direction, and we just don't start something for fun of it. We are not a model aircraft club. We work for the Defence Force. I'm in the Defence Force, and they and the team have direction from the Air Force as a whole. So, yes.
Is it also one of your end goals to get any of them flying?
No, we are not a flying restoration organisation. For us to do that, it would be another impost on the Defence Force. One, to get the skill sets, not that we haven't got the skill sets, but to get them registered and certified through CASA. The other one is the cost in the complete identification and recertifying every piece of equipment. So the porter was crashed, so we would have to start from the ground up and have everything certified as airworthy. Not only that, we then have to store it as a flying aircraft. It has to have regular servicings, and then you've got to have pilots. It's no good having an aircraft that can fly with no one to fly. So that is way out of our charter. Our charter is to showcase statically the aircraft and Ambly's participation in the development of aviation history in the southeast corner of Australia, Queensland.
Thank you.
Any further questions on what you said? Okay. Everything in this hangar is pretty well being built, designed, written, and refurbished for our particular necessities. So when we get an aircraft, it goes through quite a stringent inspection before we even start restoring. And as I said, it's all to do with hazards and eliminating them. Now, you've all heard of, maybe you haven't, chromate paints. Chromate paints at the moment are one of the biggest concerns for us. And anything that you see yellow in this hangar is chromate paint. So when we had to restore the Canberra, and as we came down through the layers of external paint, guess what we found? Chromate primers. So we had to stop work, go through all of the emergency situation for the hangar, because we'd already done some work. We had to get the, and I'll call them the rat catchers from up here, to come down, and we had to do a survey of every part of the hangar. We then, once all that was neutralised, all the relevant PPE, and then come up with a method to actually remove the paint and the primer from a Canberra. It wasn't easy, but it ended up being quite simple. What we used was a industrial vacuum cleaner. Because of the airflow through it, created a negative pressure at the sanding head, and that absorbed, sucked in all of the chemicals. It went into a vacuum cleaner. The vacuum cleaner went through a filter that was higher rating than HEPA filters. So we were way above the mark about contamination. It goes into a vacuum cleaner and then it's sealed. You take the vacuum cleaner bag out and you put it in our blue drums over there, which are our chromate waste. And then it's disposed of. So that was quite a challenge just for us. Everything has to be funded then, by the way. It just doesn't come easy. And you've got to remember, we're a heritage centre. We are very low on the pecking order as far as money is concerned. So that was one of the challenges. And the other one is sourcing parts. Now, I could go on and tell you the whole lot of this, but I want to get over there to the Vampire to show you something. It's far more challenging than the Aeronautical, and you'll see why when we get over there. 1946, the RAAF realised that it's going to have to get further into the jet world, and 1946 they were given permission by 50 of them that they were the fighter. They initially came from England, the first three, and they were numbered A7, 8, 1, 2 and 3. They were the only A78 series. The rest all turned into A79, and I think I've done quite a lot of research, and I cannot come up with the exact number of vampires that we had, because when you read that person's information and that person's information, there's a variation of 5 or 10. There must have been that many of them. But I can tell you there was over 100, less than 200 vampires in Australia. Varying models, and I can show you how they've changed the model from a T31, 32, 3, 4 and 5. Now, basically they were a fighter, then they went to a fighter bomber, and then the trainer. So at the moment, this is a trainer, it's a dual seat. Fighters were a single seat aircraft, and they were initially formed under 78 wing, and where they had 75 and 76 squadrons. Now, they did see overseas operations, and that was in the defence of the island of Malta. And around the 1949, 50, 51. However, they didn't take our vampires there. They hired them from RAAF. They flew the fighter single-seat aircraft in Malta, and that was the only operational environment that I can see that the Vampire was used, but flown by RAAF. In 1952, we had at least 50 Vampires flying in the RAAF. They went from there, at the end of the overseas operations, Simpson's Air Force got to fly with the Vampire, and that ceased in 1952. The main reason post-1952 onwards, and the introduction of the dual-seated Vampire, was to replace the training aircraft in the harbour. So it replaced the Windsor. And unbeknownst to me, in my little bit of research, the Vampire and the Sabre flew, its career ended in 1970s with the Sabre and also the Vampire. Now, if we look in the history books, you'll find they did fly post that, but it was the Navy, not the RAAF, that flew it for another year. So post their operations and squadrons, they went into then the training field, which was, it was 1 and 2 squadron, Pierce and Point Cook, and the operational training units, the Superior Flying School, I think it was called, with 5 OTU and 2 OTU, operational training units. So I can vouch for that. In 1971, I was in Williamtown, and there was a graveyard of Vampires, and lonely little information guy got permission to go and run Vampires on a regular basis. So at 5 OTU, we had Vampires in the graveyard. Mackies had replaced the Vampire as the training aircraft, jet training aircraft for the defence, and the Sabres we were waving goodbye to the Sabres because the Malayan, they had been passed on to the Malayan Air Force, and the Malayan pilots were there doing their conversion course to take them back home. Now, how do we go about restoring this aircraft? First of all, we know what we want it to look like, so we've got a direction. We've got to then identify, as I said, all the components. Then I've got to identify the materials. Now, every aircraft known to man has some sort of metal, wood or fabric in it. But you might say that an F-111, an Aeronautical, is a composite aircraft. And when you look up the basic term of composite, it's just a multitude of materials put together, bonded by carbon fibres, all glued. Now, just here, and in this area here, there are metal rivets. We've got paper, doped. We've got laminated timbers. We've got a different type of laminate there again. We've got nuts, bolts, steel. Then we have it's a marine ply with about 20 levels in it, but it's only about 5 millimetres thick. You go in there, and then there's a laminated material. It's got hardwood on the outside, fibre, hardwood sheets with laminates in the middle, and they're bonded together. And then this piece of metal here has a vacuum piece, and it's all bonded together in there. Now, you can actually see the main frames, and you can actually see the plywoods in the aircraft. But the most magnificent thing that I can see and wonder how is that if you think about the timbers in it, which are balsa, 80% balsa, it's a hardwood, okay? put your finger through it, you can, but it does have very long grains and it's very, very lightweight strength ratio. Not similar to the D6 AC steel in the F11 was used because of its strength-weight ratio. However, to bond and glue all these together and having a metal frame that is going to then hold together all of the other main components, which are all metal. And to have that ingenuity and the skill sets of those days to let this aircraft go out, sit in the elements and fly and pull positive and negative G is quite significant when you think about the engineering skills and sets that they had then versus today. Putting an aircraft together yesterday, back from the Vampire to forward thinking today, is really a lot of chemistry and physics. But the skill sets are the same. Where we've changed from saws, hammers and screws to what we use now are bonding materials and carbon fibre. And the less joins in an aircraft, the better it is. But this, when you have a look at it and study each type of material and how they're bonded together, the external surface of this aircraft is soft and it's very easy dinted. So to have that nice looking ornament shape, this is never going to be a pointy aircraft like ornament. However, it was just material, a linen. And it was put over the aircraft, and then, as the good captain mentioned it, they doped it. And it got 2 or 3 coats of sand down and then painted. And that withstood forward speed of around 800 kilometres an hour at altitudes around 40,000 to 46,000 feet. And so we've come a long way, but all we've done is really got smarter with our forward speed, and we've just made things more pointy and lighter, stronger, faster. So this had 4 cannons, 20 millimetre. Where's that? There's a gun here to tell you exactly what they did, but that's beside the point. How are we going to go about putting this together? We can do one or two, we can do many things. Leave this and go and find another pod, which we are. We always try and get the least line of resistance. We do not want to spend 3 to 5 years repairing this one, and one might be down the road in someone's backyard. Now, if you all remember, 100, I know there's more than 100 and there's less than 200. They are out there. You just got to hit eBay, and there's one of these on offer for $25,000 completed. The Heritage Centre does not have $25,000. So, unless we start a fund, the Vampire Fund, that'll be good enough. So what we can actually do with this, if our other pod doesn't come our way, is research it, find the timbers, the glues, the skill sets, and then have a mindset instilled into the people who are going to the store and keep them motivated. However, if that doesn't happen, I've seen it before, we're going to try it, and that is we harden every piece of this aircraft with resin. Just sit there and inject it in, smooth it back. All the gaps are then filled with a filling compound, and then smooth it back. Remember, this is only a static aircraft, it's never going to fly. And we just keep doing that until we get a formed outer shelf. Now, once we get that, we can actually go into the next step and use it as a mould. Or we just keep building it. Now, if you have a look in there, it's an absolute mess. 2 ejection seats. Oh, by the way, the first aircraft, RAAF aircraft, that was ejected from by a RAAF pilot was a man pilot. And he survived and the aircraft didn't. But if you have a quick look up in there, when I'm finished, you'll find that the instrument panel's fallen down onto the forward controls, and it's very hard to distinguish what it is. But you can actually see the trim actuators, you can see the instrumentation panel, and you can see all the other little bits and pieces that are bonded to timber. And all of this had to be put together to withstand the negative G-force the aircraft endured. Now, the power plant was originally the de Havilland Goblin. Around about, I think it was 5,500 to 7,000 pounds of thrust. You engineers can explain that to everyone, I still can't. But I know it's about 1/3 the power of one engine of an F-111. But it was powered by that thrust. When we started producing them in Australia, we went over to the Rolls-Royce NE, and it increased the max military power rating of this by 1,500 pounds thrust. So, different aircraft, fighter bomber, and training. Designing and preparing